Welcome everyone. Let's start with our first presentation of the series in alfalfa. And today we have here with us Dr. Charles West. Dr. Charles West is a forage system researcher at Texas Tech University. Before Texas Tech, he was University of Arkansas for over 28 years. So he has lots of experience on that. And I just would like to share a picture with you guys. And that's a picture of Dr. West and I. That is back 2011 in the Delta of Arkansas, more specifically in Pine Tree. And that was the time that I started my PhD under Dr. West advisee. And I was a lucky guy because I worked with him, learned a lot. And I had the opportunity after to transfer to Texas Tech and learn the two different systems that we have in Arkansas and after in Texas. And now here I am in Oklahoma. So that's pretty much, to me, is an honor to be introduced to my former advisor, a person that really make a change in my life. And Dr. West today is going to be talking on how to make the most when combining alfalfa with grass pastures in semi-arid conditions. So with no further ado, Dr. West.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Alex. That was a nice introduction, and you brought back some sweet memories. That bale we were sitting on was actually a bale of switchgrass, wasn't it? And the fact that you worked on switchgrass probably helped you get that job in Oklahoma. That's a big deal there, I know. But today we're going to be talking not about switchgrass. We'll be talking about alfalfa and some grasses, with emphasis on pastures. And so it's a great pleasure for me to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm glad that we can extend some of these ideas out your way. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and go into my PowerPoint presentation. Let's see. Oh, here it is. And okay, so I am looking at alfalfa in low irrigation and rain-fed grass-based pastures in West Texas. This map over on the right side is a map of the Ogallala Aquifer, and I'm sure all of you are very well aware of this huge groundwater source. And in fact, it covers almost all the panhandle of Oklahoma, Texas, and the South Plains area. Right down in here is where I concentrate my work. But, and I point this out just because of the scope of what we're looking at here. Okay, I need to get this. Okay, here we go. So the overall aim then is to help our producers transition their agriculture toward a lower water use. We're all aware of the Ogallala Aquifer declining in the water supply, but also so that we want to get more of the forage production, grazing, cattle production integrated in with our crop production. So it's not just solid cotton or solid corn. So, so my work then is on low-cost pasture production, improving the quality of the pastures, and with particular interest in tracking the amount of water that it takes to grow them. And so I'm going to give you a view of that. So why alfalfa? And specifically, why alfalfa with grasses? And now alfalfa, as you know, is famous for being a high water using crop. But my emphasis is on grazing alfalfa in mixtures with grasses. We want to take advantage of two fantastic traits that alfalfa has. One is that it fixes its own nitrogen and has high nutritive value, high protein, high digestibility. And you're going to see then how we can use that to take advantage of those traits to improve the water use efficiency or the amount of water use. So alfalfa, first of all, is native to semi-arid Southwest Asia, areas like Iran, Iraq, the country of Georgia, Afghanistan, along in there where it's very dry. And it has evolved there under very dry conditions, hot conditions. And it is mainly irrigated, but a lot of it is actually grows out on rangeland as well, alfalfa and its relatives. Some varieties can go summer dormant. In fact, ones that we've grown here went of course, largely dormant during the droughts of 2012, 2013. And we were surprised at how much of the alfalfa actually recovered. It looked like it was dead during the summer, and we had surprisingly a good survival. Alfalfa, of course, is famous for its nutritive value, the quality, but it also can boost forage yield, thanks largely to its deep roots and the fact that it fixes nitrogen. So you don't even have to apply nitrogen fertilizer on there to get some good yield. We are concerned about the water use. Now, the conventional use of alfalfa is as a high water input, highly irrigated, multiple cuttings for dairy farms and for sale. Okay, but my view is really quite different. Here I'm looking at a low water input and using it for grazing and pushing it and seeing how far we can go with grazing hard and giving it very, very little water, or even depending on rain-fed conditions. So the first thing I want to mention, so also something that we want to look at is mixing with perennial grasses and as a protein bank. So I'll be mentioning what a protein bank in a couple of slides. A grass that we use, our main warm season perennial grass, is a type of old world bluestem variety WW Doll. I think some of you have heard of that. In Oklahoma, especially Panhandle, you're really getting a bit far north, but southwest Oklahoma, it should be very well adapted there. This is a low water using grass, late flowering. This is a big advantage of this grass over the native warm season grasses. The natives, we have, they start flowering and getting stemmy in June, whereas mid-July, early August is when this overall blue stem starts to get stemmy and to flower. This means it stays leafy during June and July, and we can get some very good grazing out of it in that very leafy type of forage. It can support decent gains. Average daily gains we've seen from a pound per head per day up to 2.5 pounds. And typically it's more like 2 pounds early in the May, June, early July, and then it drops down to about a pound and a half later in the season. We're also going to be looking at some native grasses, how alfalfa grows in native grasses, rain-fed, and we're interested in the persistence there. So alfalfa is a grazing legume that should be looked at in more detail, and it can save money because it fixes nitrogen. I already mentioned the high quality, good yield, but will it use too much water? And this is the main concern right here. So back to this concept of a protein bank. What is this? This is something I learned about when I visited around 15 years ago. I went to South America, and in fact, an area that's right near where Alex Rocatelli came from. He's from Brazil, and there's a wide use of protein banks. That is, farmers would plant legumes or some very high quality forage in a small acreage, a small area that they could put some attention into establishment, and if it needs some fertilizer. And the rest of the area was more native and was a low input. So they had a limited acreage of higher input, high quality, and then they would do limit grazing in there. So they would move cattle in there for limit grazing and then rotate that back into a large acreage of a low protein forage. Rye and wheat, of course, is widely grown across the southern plains as our cool season annual grass, which is high in protein, right? And some producers do practice limit grazing on that. In fact, we have demonstrated here that limit grazing of rye or wheat works well, while the cattle also have access to stockpiled Bermuda grass or stockpiled overall bluestem, which of course during the wintertime is very low quality. Now alfalfa, the way we use it in a protein bank is that we do give it some irrigation up to 10 to 12 inches, depending on the year, but never any more than 12 inches. Even during a dry year, even during a drought. But we've been averaging around 10 or 11 inches on that one. And the cattle are brought in to graze only about 1 to 2 days per week. So they'll spend maybe a day on and then 3 days off. Or sometimes we'll have them on for 2 days and then 5 days off. So we are moving them in for this area for that time. And then, but most of their grazing then will be spent in a low water input type of pasture, which is a lower protein type. Now, what I have here in this diagram is a schematic of a protein bank in a 100-acre system. I just pick 100 acres out of the hat because you can take that 100 acres and scale it up to 1,000 acres or scale it back down to 40 acres. And then our numbers really on the acreage will equal percentage of land area. So on the left side, you'll see over here that we have 50 acres of the 100 is the old world blue stem, the WWB doll. And the 85% means that this is about the ground cover or the amount of forage that's made up of that grass. And only about 15% of the forage is alfalfa. So we do have a mixture here. But this is a low density alfalfa. And then the other 50 acres, we have it split among 3 types here. One is the protein bank. This is 23 acres. So this is 23% of the land area. And it was around 90% alfalfa and 10% tall wheatgrass. We have a little bit of teff in here, and the teff could be teff one year, it might be pearl millet a different year. And then over here we have some native grasses, which is unirrigated and also not fertilized. So the cattle actually spend 65% of their time in this half of the area, and around 20% of their time in the protein bank, and then some other time in the low input pastures. Now, here is a picture of that oral blue stem alfalfa mixture right here. All right, this is the 50% of the area. And these, you can see alfalfa here, here, here. It's in full bloom. We got purple flowers on it and spread across there. You also see some plants with yellow flowers right in here. That is yellow sweet clover. And we like that legume. So when we plant this, we actually mix yellow sweet clover and alfalfa together, and we interseed that into an existing stand of overall blue stem. The yellow sweet clover gives you very good growth the first year or so of planting, and then after that it will get less. But this gives you an idea of the density of alfalfa. This is only about 15% of the ground cover. And now this is the protein bank. On the right, we see cattle grazing the pasture that is almost pure alfalfa. And whereas on the left side, you see the alfalfa growing with the old blue stem. Notice again, this alfalfa is actually pretty mature. This is because we don't have them grazing it down to the ground early in the year. They do graze it into the ground from July, August, and September, by the way. But I don't care if this alfalfa gets this mature, because the cattle are just going to be grazing the tips and the leaves and the younger stem part. They're not going to graze it on down short at that stage. Now here's some numbers that summarize what we have found over a 3-year period, 2014 to 2016. Comparing alfalfa with the grass, is the alfalfa with a little bit of sweet clover in it, versus the grass alone. We did not put nitrogen fertilizer on the alfalfa grass. We did put 60 pounds per acre of nitrogen on the grass only. So this got some nitrogen. We do have a higher average daily gain where we have alfalfa. This is pounds per head per day, over 2, and this is about 1.7. Gain per acre, this is the live weight gain of steers per acre over a 4-month grazing seasons, 168 versus 155. And the protein content was double in the mixture as it was in the grass alone. And so, and this is the protein content, not just of the alfalfa portion, but of the mixed grass, which is really quite significant. And certainly, as you know, for the steers to be gaining weight on that mixture, that we need a protein content of at least 12.5%. So these cattle down here in the grass alone were protein deficient. Alfalfa, the irrigation was about the same, a little less than 9 inches on the alfalfa grass and about 8 inches on the grass only. Now this last column, this is something that looks at how much water did it require to produce a pound of live weight gain, a pound of animal weight gain. This is what we call the water footprint. this is analogous to a carbon footprint that you might calculate for, let's say, if you drive your car 500 miles, how many, fossil fuel carbon pounds did you use? Well, we're applying that same concept to water use. Gallons of water that it takes from irrigation. So this is groundwater used for irrigation and for watering the cattle. 364 gallons for the alfalfa grass, and versus 500 gallons for the grass only. Okay, even though we used more irrigation, a little bit more irrigation for the grass alfalfa, it took less water to produce a pound of live weight gain where we had a legume compared to the grass only. 27% less, in fact. Okay, 27% less water to produce a pound of live weight gain on these stocker steers. Now, we came back in a couple years later, 2018, 2019, and we did some more research, and this is configured a little bit differently. So here we had, again, more average daily gain where we had alfalfa, higher quality, right? And we had more pounds of gain per acre. And protein difference, still a pretty big difference, 13% versus 9%. So again, we were definitely meeting the protein needs of those cattle. About the same amount of irrigation, and then here we show the water usage per pound of live weight gain. Again, it took less water to produce a pound of gain from the alfalfa grass than from the grass alone, about 25% less. And we put the same amount of water on there. So what's going on here? Why did it take less water per pound of weight gain with alfalfa? Okay, but what do you think is happening here? We put the same amount of water on, or about the same, and that water footprint was more favorable. It took less water to produce beef growth. So the answer I'm giving you here, the simple answer is that the high quality alfalfa made all the other inputs more efficient. Okay, more efficient. Now, what are the other inputs? Well, the other main input, of course, was the irrigation water and the sunlight, the solar radiation. So that's an input that we didn't go out and buy. That's free. We did have to pay for the irrigation, of course. But, and other things such as, let's say, a potassium phosphorus fertilizer, or putting out bloat guard for the animals, or the various other inputs. And of course, there's our labor. So, but that quality of the alfalfa was so good that it meant that the other inputs were not being wasted. In the grass only, quality, the nutritive value was limiting cattle production. Protein was low, digestibility was also low. And we removed that limitation to animal growth by having alfalfa in there. Therefore, what water was applied got more efficiently utilized. Now, we have the other benefit is that with the alfalfa, we did not put any nitrogen fertilizer on those pastures. Okay, no nitrogen fertilizer. So there's a cost savings there too. Now, so let's talk about money. So we looked at a total of 5 years here of data where we compared the overall blue stem with alfalfa versus just the overall blue stem alone. And we did some economic analysis of that over 5 years. A student of mine did this. And the value of the added gain, by added gain, I mean the gain that they accomplished at the beginning of grazing and then 4 months later. The value of that gain, this is going through the whole marketing system, looking at actual prices, buy and sell prices that occurred during those 5 years. It was $1.15 per pound with the mixture and $1.05 with the grass alone. And so we did have a 10-cent benefit per pound of gain with the alfalfa. And part of that was because we had to spend some money. We had to spend some money on the grass alone for nitrogen fertilizer. Plus, we gained more. These cattle gained faster with the same amount of water, same amount of labor, and everything else. Now, how about per acre? So now we have dollars per acre of that, the value of that gain, $108 per acre with the grass alfalfa and $74 the grass alone. There's a big difference here now on the acres value. Now, this is average over 5 years, but if you break it down by year, we see that we get this alfalfa advantage in 3 out of 5 years. This did not happen every year. And it varied with the market, because sometimes we get, negative margins, or the margin between buying and selling between the beginning and end is such that we don't see that advantage. But other years we have a huge advantage. It also depends on when you start grazing and when you take them off. Okay, if you start grazing, let's say in March or April, take them off early July versus starting in June, take them off in October, that can affect the profitability as well. So, but in general, we see that there is an economic advantage to having alfalfa in that. Having legumes, alfalfa, and we had some sweet clover in there too, did increase the beef stocker gain per animal day, that is average daily gain, and per acre. So the alfalfa grass system did receive slightly more water in that first 3 years, and yet the water footprint was less. Now let's talk about native grasses. The first part was the introduced grass, the overall blue stem. Let's talk about native grasses. And this time we want to see how this would work under a total dryland system, no irrigation, using native grasses, because we thought that it wouldn't take much alfalfa to boost the nutritive value and to get some nitrogen in there. But it may be competing too much for the water. The question then is there a trade-off between alfalfa benefit, which we've already seen with the overall blue stem, and water use? Okay, we are expecting the alfalfa to boost the forage yield and the quality, but also to take up more water. Can alfalfa survive on 18 inches of rain per year? This is the amount of rain that we average per year. All right, so just a quick little view of what we looked at. We looked at 3 varieties. New Mex Bill Melton is a fairly recent variety coming out of New Mexico State University that was selected for good growth and yield and persistence under reduced irrigation, under severely deficit irrigation, because they're suffering from lack of water too. And a commercial cultivar that's been fairly widely used in our area, WL440HQ. These are both upright hay types. They were not developed for grazing. They were developed for hay production or for haylage. We also put in a blend of Falcata, which is a type of a yellow flowering type of alfalfa, which is really well adapted to Canada and the northern plains, and also rhizoma, which is these are very, very cold tolerant, low growing grazing types. 2 row spacings, 14 inches and 28 inches. We did this because we thought that the wide row spacing may give us just enough alfalfa to benefit productivity and quality, but not so much to compete with the grass. We also had a control with no alfalfa, it was grass only, and those grasses were the usual suspects: natives, green sprangletop, Cytodes grama, buffalo grass, and blue grama. Okay. And so the mixture then would be those grasses mixed together with alfalfa. Now, here's a look at what this looked like. The grass only looked like this, just grass only. That mixture grasses, the 28-inch spacing appear this way, so you can see how wide those rows are and the sparseness. And the student drew in these roots to make it look like alfalfa roots. And then the narrow spacing, the 14-inch, was of course quite dense, much more dense. Now, that was the year after planting. 3 years later, this is again, no irrigation. The 28-inch one showed very intact rows. There was very little thinning. There was less thinning that took place during those 3 years, whereas the 14-inch thinned a lot. So not only was there a lot of competition between the alfalfa and the grass, there's competition between alfalfa plants so much that we had a lot of thinning there. In this slide, I want to show you first on the right side this very colorful picture of this graph, okay? And this takes a little bit of explanation, but this is a soil profile. If you look from the top of one of these figures to the bottom, you're looking at the surface of the soil. This is the top of the pasture, and you're going down to 40 inches. Okay, so this is the surface, and go down to 40 inches. And then across the horizontal is time, day of the year, 2017, new year, 2018. We track the water content. This is the water content at different depths throughout 2 years. And this is the 14-inch one, the 28-inch, and then control no legume. And the coloring means how much water is there. So dark blue is wet, it's a lot of water. And you go toward the orange and the red, it becomes less and less water. So this gives you a picture of the water situation over 2 years between the different treatments. And you'll see that the control stored quite a bit of water in the soil, no legume, and the 14-inch depleted water quite severely. The 28-inch was intermediate between the two. Okay, but during a dry period, you all remember the latter part of the late fall, early winter of 2017, it stopped raining, and we just had no rain for a long time. It got into drought conditions. So this surface top foot, or 16 inches, was very dry, but similar between the 28-inch and the control, but the 14-inch got depleted much more rapidly. In fact, here I have inches of water over the 2017 percent water content. The 28-inch was similar to the control, and then in the deeper areas, 28-inch was intermediate between the dense alfalfa and the no alfalfa, but it was closer to no alfalfa. So the point here is that at the sparse wide rows, we are not depleting water as much as in the narrow rows high competition. We are depleting it some. Okay, in fact, this is 2017, 2018 here. Okay, now let's look at what happened to some of the numbers. Forage yield. Well, no alfalfa, this is the grass, only about 2,200 pounds per acre of the forage production. 28 inches, we have a big boost in forage productivity. Doubling the seeding rate and doubling and narrowing the rows, we had a small increase in yield. So going to the higher density gives you very little advantage in the forage productivity. Low density gives you a large advantage. Digestible energy. This is how digestible was the forage in that they would have consumed. Well, 62% digestibility with the grass alone, and it jumped up to 68, and then it went up slightly more at the higher density. This is a significant difference in terms of the nutritional value. And protein, very low with the no alfalfa. Again, it's getting us over that 12.5% that we need for stockers, 13, 14%. But once you get above, or once you get to the wide spacing, there's very little advantage in forage quality to go to the denser planting. So we're really well off in terms of quality at that level. Soil water depletion. We see that we depleted, this is how much depletion there was over per year, 10 inches with the density, 8 inches with the wide spacing, and we depleted a little bit less with the, and so again, this wide spacing gave us a big boost in yield and quality and only a small increase in amount of water depletion. And this is water use per pound of forage. This is a water footprint of the forage productivity, not of the animal, because these actually were not grazed during the early time. And so we see that this water footprint of the no alfalfa is actually quite high compared to the others. And that means that less rainwater was used to produce a pound of forage where we had alfalfa in there. Okay, now something else I want to just very quickly look at. This is kind of a busy slide, so I'm just putting boxes around a couple of numbers here. This is what we call the marginal cost of revenue increment due to alfalfa. This means what was the cost of the extra production of a digestible dry matter or a high quality forage. We used hay as our standard, the actual values of hay, and for a particular value, at particular relative feed qualities to calculate this. And at the 14-inch, it costs it costs 42 cents to produce an extra $1 of hay value. Whereas with the 28-inch, it only costs 31 cents. So we have a savings here by just adding low density alfalfa is cheaper than it's quite a bit cheaper because you have 1/2 the amount of seed that you're using. But in terms of that marginal cost of the revenue, it is more favorable, lower cost forage production. So what's happening here? The low density interseeding of alfalfa made fairly large increases in forage yield and quality with fairly low trade-off in the water depletion compared to high density. Okay, so we got a pretty big bang for the buck on that going from no alfalfa to 28 inches, and you saw how wide those were. But we got only a tiny increment going more dense. A modest amount of alfalfa in the system goes a long way toward improving native and non-native grass pastures and improving the efficiency of converting water to forage and animal production. In summary then, looking over all this and some comments about alfalfa use, it's the best legume option that we have in our part of the Great Plains. And previous research out there has looked at sandfoin and other legumes, and nothing really stacks up to alfalfa as a grazing legume. It's a very good option in even low input irrigated pastures for stocker production and when growing as a minority component in pastures. Notice the word minority here, okay? Because if it's a majority portion of the pastures, it's going to suck up more water. But in that minority type, we can get significant improvement in quality with only minimal changes in the water uptake. A hay type alfalfa, actually I didn't show all the varieties of course to save time, but the hay type, those upright types, which were not developed for grazing, performed better than that grazing type. They produced more forage, they persisted much more, they did not thin out as much, they had a lower water footprint per pound of forage, and they all in all contributed more, and they did not deplete the water any more than the grazing types. Okay, so the water relations were no worse than the low grazing type, but the quality and yield was much better. So recommend use alfalfa on your better soils, of course. You want to follow that where you can, because you want it to take advantage of its deep root system, and where you can manage to avoid overgrazing. Now I want to point out here that for our pastures that had alfalfa in them, we didn't baby it during the grazing season. We would start grazing that at the 1st of June and graze it all the way to the end of September, early October. And during July and August and September, that alfalfa was only about 1 inch tall. We did not baby it. But then we took the cattle off during the rest of the fall and the spring, because they would be grazing wheat during the spring. And then you can graze out your wheat during, February, March, April into May, and then you can start this mixture in June, and you don't have to baby the alfalfa at all. Use you might consider to interseed again after 4 to 5 years. We had pastures that were in for 6 years before we had to interseed again, and even then the alfalfa wasn't dead. It was just thinned out quite a bit, and we were able to bump that up. But our protein bank actually lasted 8 years before we had to reseed it. In a good year, also, you can cut some hay. So if you have a wet spring, which we don't seem to be getting anymore our way, we can produce enough alfalfa during April to take a cutting by the 1st of May, a good hay cutting, valuable, use it for your own farm or you can sell it, and then let the regrowth for month of May and start grazing 1st of June. And so it's a very flexible plant. Okay, that wraps up my little presentation, and I'm very open to questions now.
All right, Dr. West, thank you very much for your presentation. And we indeed got some questions here. But even before we dive on their questions, I'm going to be selfish and ask something to you that I'm very curious about it. Would you see any advantage on trying reduced lignin alfalfa in this kind of mixes for future research?
Okay, the question was, do I see any advantage of reduced lignin alfalfa for this usage that we're talking about, which is for grazing stocker animals as a minority portion of a mixture with grasses? And the answer is no, I don't. No, I don't. And there's several reasons. One is that to make this mixture, to actually develop the mixture, we establish the grass first. The overall boost, in fact, all of our perennial grasses are notoriously slow to establish anyway. And sometimes we have to come back and replant the second year to get that good stand if we have some weak spots. So we establish the overall blue stem first, which would go in late spring of a particular year. And then the next, or then that fall, we could plant alfalfa. But I usually like to wait until the following fall to plant my alfalfa in there, because that gives me a chance to do some really serious weed control, okay? Because you know that when you plant a perennial grass like overall blue stem or anything else, you're gonna have weeds galore. In fact, in this picture right here, you see some mare's tail, don't you? And that animal is actually biting some yellow sweet clover. But I wanted to get rid of my broadleaf weeds, especially let the perennials come up. We have some serious weeds in our area that we need to control. And then that September, early October of a year later, I will come in with my alfalfa. I really want to make sure my grass is well established first. Okay, so for that reason, I certainly don't want to use a Roundup Ready type, okay? Because it's not going to help me at all. Because I've got that grass in there, so I don't need that technology. Reduce lignin. Now, I made a point to mention that a lot of the alfalfa you saw in the pictures was fairly mature, and with grazing, and especially in the spring when that had grown up during April and May, we'd actually stockpiled it before we got it. We could have made hay off of it. In fact, we've done that some years. We take some hay crop off at the 1st of May, so you can capture some very good quality alfalfa hay there. In fact, I recommend that, because if you let that alfalfa grow up too thick in the spring, it will set back the regrowth of your warm season perennial grass. That's true for Bermuda grass. It's true for the overall blue stem. And if you happen to, even though you're shooting for that somewhat low density that I've been talking about, you may have gotten an exceptionally good establishment of alfalfa some years. And we found that out here too lately. We got too much alfalfa this year, in fact. And then, so definitely take that off of there so that your warm season grass does not get set back so badly. Okay, reduce lignin. Well, the cattle, I mean, these are not high producing dairy cows we're talking about here, are they? These are stocker steers. They don't need 18, 19, 20% crude protein, do they? That's a waste of protein. I like that 12, 13, 14% level. And in fact, that's the quality of the forage that we measured just by clipping the forage. That's not what they actually ate. They will eat even a higher protein forage than that, and a lower fiber content, lower lignin content is what they actually eat. So, and also during that June period when the plants look pretty mature, they're not grazing the stems below half or a third of that stem. They're grazing the upper half or upper 2/3 of that stem. And they're grazing all the leaves. So they can go down and pick off all those leaves and those petioles and those short branches, which of course are higher in protein, low in lignin. So what they're eating is already low lignin.
That's great. Yeah.
And I save that technology fee when I buy the seed.
Exactly. That's true. Now let's move on here because we have good questions here.
Good.
The next question is, what would be the planting rate of the alfalfa / sweet clover into the old world bull stems?
Well, we were putting in about 7 or 8 pounds of alfalfa, which is another way you can save money, right? And the sweet clover would have been more like about 5 pounds or so. And now sweet clover seeds are a little bigger than alfalfa seeds, okay? But we don't need to put a lot of sweet clover in there because it has such very good seedling vigor. It germinates, emerges quickly, and that first year of growth, it grows more vigorously than the alfalfa does. So I don't need a lot of sweet clover in there. So we're talking about a pretty modest amount of seeding in there. Now, for the overall blue stem grass, I want to make sure that when I'm doing my planting in September 20th or that last week of September or so, that I've grazed it down really well. So I don't have a lot of shading, growth. And if I have a lot of stems and growth there, I'll take a hay crop off of that. So if I can't graze it down well, or I will just, shred it, get the bush hog out and just shred it on down if I got a bunch of stems. The overall blue stem gets stemming and flowers profusely in that August and September period. So I like to knock that down.
Now, other question here is, could you assume similar results if you use the 20-inch rows spacing in a Bermuda grass environment rather than a native?
In Bermuda grass, yeah, I don't see why not. Now, when we have the alfalfa in there, we are starving that grass of nitrogen, right? And you can see a difference in our grass where it has alfalfa with it, especially in the first few years of this. It's not, because we haven't really built up soil nitrogen with the legume yet. But it's really quite yellow. It's low in protein, and with the Bermuda grass, if you fertilize with nitrogen and try to grow alfalfa, it's going to be really quite competitive. With the Bermuda grass, of course, you have much more of a dense sod, and whereas the overall blue stem is more bunchy, and we did notice that where we had spaces between the plants is where we had our alfalfa. They weren't growing up right through the crown of that dense thing, but this should work. I don't see why this would not work with Bermuda grass, because with Bermuda grass, I have seen where dense interseeding of alfalfa just about killed the Bermuda grass.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it got so thick. It was shade that Bermuda grass, and Bermuda grass, of course, is extremely shade sensitive, and it would delay the growth in the spring because the alfalfa grows so well, during April and May, even down our way, March it's growing, and that really set back the Bermuda grass.
And I
you
just
do want to sparse. Go ahead.
I would like to make a note here that our next presentation is with Dr. Jennings next Thursday, and he's going to be specific talking on interseeding alfalfa in Bermuda grass field. So that we are going to have more information on that in the next presentation.
Yeah,
So
he's good too.
Yeah. So now the next one is, how were weeds controlled without killing the alfalfa?
Oh yeah, that always comes up. Well, there are some herbicides that alfalfa will tolerate, some broadleaf herbicides, and I'm not the weed man. I used to know herbicides all by heart about 20 years ago, but there's some new ones out there. But and so there are some, but we don't do it. We have not sprayed with herbicides on these for years. And so we do have some perennial weeds, and but grazing management, we also have very good soil levels of phosphorus and potash fertilizers. So they are fertile soils in terms of the P and K, and the pH is 7.5, like perfect for alfalfa. But the grazing management helps there. But also when we have weed, we have some weed localities, and we can do spot spraying in those areas where the weeds are dense, and then come back and reseed in the fall. Some of the weeds, like of course, kochia, bindweed, the cattle just eat them up like it's candy anyway. So they eat a lot of those broadleaf weeds. But this mare's tail, and there's a few others that they don't want to eat.
Now we have more questions here. Let me see. There is more than one person asking on bloat issues. There was any bloat issues related to those mixtures?
About the P and K?
About bloat, like
bloat. Okay. Well, we have bloat guard out there. Okay, so and especially where you have the protein bank, it's important that you have a bloat guard type of thing. Now we put it out there so that all treatments were treated the same, except that one had alfalfa, one didn't. So and my experience and my feeling is that where we have a worm season grass like the old blue stem, and this could be true for the Bermuda grass, and you only have 15 or 20% of the forage is alfalfa, that the likelihood of bloat is very low. And I mean, we've never seen bloat happen out there, but we've had bloat guard. But still, if the forage mixture is, let's say, 15% alfalfa, the cattle are probably eating maybe 25 or 30% of their diet alfalfa. Okay, they're going to take a little bit more than what's actually out there. But there comes a point where by middle of July, there's virtually no alfalfa out there to eat anymore, because it's only about an inch tall. And it's that way for 2 months. So they have to eat the grass. And so their rumen is going to have a lot of highly fibrous grass in it already, and that helps prevent bloat as well.
All right. Now, another question is, what was your seeding rate?
The seeding rate of the alfalfa?
Yes.
Okay. In the protein bank, we would go up with, and that was established way before I got there. So I'm just guessing, I mean, because it had a very good stand, narrow rows and all that. It was probably in the 15 pound per acre range. But where we interseed into the pastures, we're down to no more than 12 pounds per acre. And where I go with the wide rows, it's more like, 7 or 8 pounds per acre. Yeah, we actually did 7 pounds per acre on that 28 inch one.
7 pounds per acre.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, there is a question here more on sustainability. Like, do you think that alfalfa is naturally sustainable for soil health in the long run, or you should rotate it for soil diversity?
The sustainability, well, we have in the dryland conditions, our stands decline to around one plant, well, let's say about half a plant per square foot, or about 1 plant per 2 square feet. Okay, and at that rate, and that is 3 years after planting, toward the end of the 4th year, and we would expect that to be that way probably for another a couple of years, and we would probably consider replanting. So I would probably be looking at, in terms of my calculations, I would probably be looking at replanting every 5th year, 4th or 5th year. Okay. Now, but when you have a sparse or a wide rows, low density, you're not bringing in a lot of nitrogen. Even though the plants do fix nitrogen, at that low density, on a per acre basis, you're not fixing a lot of nitrogen. And so you're not really building up the nitrogen content that much. And it would take really years, because so many of the months of the year, it just doesn't rain here. So there's really no biological activity. So the denser the stand of alfalfa, the faster you will be building up the nitrogen content. So that depends on how much money do you want to spend on seed, how often do you want to do this. But you now see that we get 25–30% boost in average daily gain, and or also gain per acre, that that you could afford. If you're only going to be planting like $7 per pound or 7 pounds per acre of seed, you can afford that. And so we have done a lot of soil health measurements of the microbial activity and organic matter, organic nitrogen, and the pastures that have the highest amount of organic matter and the most diverse and the most preferable type of soil microbes are in those mixtures of the orbital blue stem with the alfalfa and the sweet clover.
Okay. Now, there is a question here on, okay, we did the bloat. If we intercede, let me see where we were, because more questions is coming up. So did you see a drop in mineral consumption in the stalkers with the mixtures?
Did I see a drop in the mineral consumption?
Yeah, of the stalkers.
No, we did not observe that. I mean, we did not measure that. We're not looking out there. Of course, we had mineral available, but I don't remember there being any noticeable effect of that on the mineral consumption. I did not observe that.
And about like, was a continuous grazing or AMP grazing, any rotation that you had done with the cattle on those fields?
Okay. Well, on the last 2 years, the 2018, 2019, they were essentially continuously stocked. But on about two occasions, let's say once a month, they were moved into a small pasture of pearl millet. We had a very small pasture of pearl millet that they would go in there at, of course, a high stocking density, and they would graze that down for about 2 days. All right, they would just take it on down. They loved pearl millet, and then they go back to the orbital blue stem alfalfa for another 3 or 4 weeks. And so there was a limit grazing on the pearl millet there. But on the other one, on the 2014 and 2016, where we had teff, we had the protein bank, we had some, 23% of the area was actually native grasses. They were rotated, but they spent 65% of their time in the orbital blue stem alfalfa. So, and they would be in there like 5 days at a time before they'd be moved out, or sometimes they'd be in there for like a week or two. So we were not really purposely, in fact, not trying to use an intensive rotational grazing system.
Okay.
Because not many people have the wherewithal to do a lot of subdividing and putting water tanks everywhere. So we wanted to really hammer the alfalfa too. See what it can take, and it took that pretty well. But we did have some times where we moved out and gave some rest to the alfalfa for a few days.
Now, there is a question here, like, let's say, here is pretty common establish seed alfalfa in September. So let's say that somebody is planting alfalfa in September. For how long do they need to wait to introduce cattle to make sure that the alfalfa was well established in this kind of mixture?
Well, we would plant in the end of September or first week of October, and then we would start grazing the first week of during the first week of June. Okay, so that gives you 5 plus 3, about 8 months, and we are far enough south. I mean, our winter is pretty mild, but our winter is also extremely dry. I mean, our winters are drier than your winters. We get hardly any rain during winter. And so when we plant, we really did our fingers crossed, and we're hoping for a couple of decent showers during October to get that stuff up. Then they got to go down deep. We want those roots, we're trying to get those roots to learn how to go deep. And so we don't want to start grazing them in March and April because they are building root depth at that point. And that's why we need to wait until June before we graze them.
So don't be afraid of let them go full blown and even get a little older in the very beginning.
Oh, I don't care. I never worry about growth stage for alfalfa here, okay? I never, because it's so much better than what they've got. If you didn't, it's so much better than all the other forages. It's far better no matter how mature the alfalfa is.
Now, the next question is, can we overseed old grass established stands?
Can we overseed, say it again, overseed what?
Can you overseed old grass established stands? What I understand is if you can do this interseeding in old grass stands.
Oh, these are old grass stands. I mean, okay. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to start from scratch, then we want to plant the oral blue stem first, and then a year and a few months later, come in with alfalfa. But what you saw on the native grass experiment, that stand was about 20 years old. And also on the 2018-2019 pastures, those pastures were established in 2003, 2004. So they were already 14 years old. Absolutely, yeah.
So we are close to the 1:30 that the time is supposed to end it up, but we still have lots of questions. So in my opinion, we can keep rolling, right? I don't believe that that's a problem. So
it's okay with me. I have a 2 o'clock meeting, but besides that, I'm
okay. So we can stay more for 30 minutes. Yeah. So let's go here with the next one. Well, is someone asking, perhaps he missed, so it's better that you may reinforce that. Which one of the alfalfa varieties, the 4 ones that you tried, which ones were the best?
Well, we had 3. Because one of them was a blend of 2 varieties, actually. And the reason we use that, because in the past, there were quite a few producers in our area that would be growing this thing called Falcata. Now, Falcata is a brand name of this northern type that was actually developed from selections made from some grassland up in Montana or South Dakota or somewhere. But we couldn't get the pure Falcata, we got the blend. But it's very similar to what some of the producers here had that they said survived the 2011 drought, okay? Ooh. And they thought, hey, now this is one that doesn't produce a lot of forage, but it hangs in there, and I want to include this one. But that one did not perform very well in our trial. Those 2 hay types, the Numex, Bill Melton, and the WL440 were far superior, and they, but it's because a lot of breeding has gone into those, whereas not much breeding has got into those other ones. Okay, those are ecotypes that were selected out of some semi-wild pastures. But a lot of serious breeding has gone into those for disease resistance, insect resistance, yield, persistence, and just efficiency of water use and so on. Now, my complaint to the seed industry is that there's not enough breeding work being done for grazing alfalfa. There've been some, especially some coming out of Georgia and some other places, but I like to see Great Plains adapted alfalfa for what I'm doing, with this grazing deal that can compete with the grass pretty well, and it does. I mean, there's no problem there. It competes with grass more than you would think. But one that has especially deep roots and can go summer dormant. If you don't irrigate, I'll just see a summer dormancy during severe drought periods. Now, alfalfa, even these so-called dormant ones, will respond to rain, so they're not truly physiologically summer dormant. They will react. It's not like the summer dormant fescues, okay? And they are genetically summer dormant. But no. So this alfalfa will grow if it rains, and it won't grow if it doesn't rain, and then it will come back. that's what I want to see. But the seed industry, they don't see grazing alfalfas as a lucrative market. It's not a big enough market. And so I think that you go for the best adapted hay types. Talk to the people who sell it or buy it and use it in the area, and also if they can say, well, this is the hay type I've used that's hung in there pretty well, and I don't manage it really especially well. I have used it sometimes. It still does well. Okay, those are the ones that will do fine under grazing.
Now,
Alex, let me interrupt you here for just a second. I'm going to go ahead and put this poll up, but I just encourage you to go right ahead answering questions. Folks can answer this poll as they're listening, and before too many have to leave here, I'd like to.
Okay. And also remember that we are going to keep answering all the questions, even what stick with us is just 2 people, because after that's going to be recorded. And if you had a question, you can after just watch the recording and see all the answers. So we can keep moving. I think that you guys are seeing right now a window on your screen with some simple questions. If you guys can help us answering those questions, because that can help us, guide us to do a better job if necessary for next presentations. So now move on here on questions, Dr. West. Do you recommend these alfalfa mixture with natives that you had experienced for cow-calf operations as well, or just specific for stocker steers?
Well, I think that that this will work for cow-calf as well. Now, if cow-calf, you're normally talking about extensive rangeland, lands that do not lend themselves to being cultivated for crops, or they don't have irrigation, they're sloping, they're eroded, they're, whatever. And so, those are not great alfalfa soils, especially if the topsoil is eroded and sloping and so on. But on every ranch I've ever been on, there are parts of that ranch where you can grow some crops, or grow some alfalfa. And so those would be, creek bottoms, or some other areas, maybe even up on some plateaus that have some decent soil. That is, by decent, I mean some depth to it and not just sandy. So so that means that there are parts of the farm where this low density alfalfa can work, but that has to be fenced off from the other areas that it doesn't do well, and where it would tend to not persist very well, and it would really get overgrazed. So there has to be some control of the grazing there. And so with cow-calf, so many of the cow-calf ranches, like I say, are very extensive and have some don't control the grazing very well. Okay, but this is one where you do need to control the grazing. But then, and like I said earlier, that if you have an exceptionally good year, a good spring where you have some good growth, then that becomes a hay crop. You can harvest some hay, and that way you got some good quality feed for your own herd that you don't have to go out and buy.
That's great. Now there's a question here on mineral mix. Did the mineral mix used contain ionophore? I don't know how to mention that. I'm not very familiar. Ionophore? I don't know if.
Yeah, no, it did not. It did not contain ionophore. But well, the mineral mix didn't. But they were implanted. The calves were implanted before we got them. So we bought the calves from a rancher up in the northern panhandle of Texas, and he also has his own feed yard. So they got the same type of implant that he would put in his cattle. Yeah, and also fly control. Yeah, so they were implanted. Okay. I can't remember exactly which product.
Now,
but
the further question is, would there a problem with toxicity when overseeding alfalfa in old stands with decreased alfalfa? Oh, okay, autotoxicity. What I understand from the question is, if you already have some alfalfa stand there and they start to thin out. If there would be a problem if you're trying to just interseed more alfalfa over there.
Yeah. In fact, next week's speaker, John Jennings, he's a national expert or an international expert on autotoxicity of alfalfa. So save that question for him too. Okay, he knows a lot more than I do on that. But I don't think that there'd be much problem if your stand has been thinned out enough. Now, especially if the stand did not start out being real thick. Now you saw the picture of that protein bank with some cattle grazing it. It looked like 100% alfalfa, and it was that way for 7 or 8 years. And so when that thinned out, we did not go back in and plant alfalfa. We would just grow grass there for a couple of years, because there I would definitely expect autotoxicity because there's a lot of residue left behind from that. But where we do sparse planting, and then it thins out to one plant per 2 or 3 square feet, and sometimes even 1 plant per square yard or even less, that you don't have the alfalfa buildup of old roots and materials from old leaves. They would all been decomposed, or they just never did have a high density there. So I would not expect there to be a problem. In fact, we did go in, the Oriole Blue Stem alfalfa stand that we had on that first trial was planted in 2009. It was 2009. And then in 2014, we interseeded again. Yeah, and we were able to thicken that stand back up again. So but again, we planted it at somewhat low density again, So so we were not really hampered by some obvious type of autotoxicity problem there. But there may have been some that I just couldn't have measured,
Yeah, and I mean, even let's see if I can share that pretty fast. But this is from a fact sheet here that we developed, and look at that. This is a picture from John Jennings. It's a courtesy from him to me, and you can see that the effect of autotoxicity is cannot go further than 6 inches away. So we had an alfalfa old plant here, and we plant new ones, as you can see, on crossing. And after 60 inches, you don't see more the autotoxicity doing any effect. So if your stand is more thinner than 60 inches, and that's the distance from the alfalfas, most likely that you won't have any problems with autotoxicity anymore. So I think that's a good point to make here when you talk about autotoxicity. So
yeah, good.
Now let's move on to more questions here. That's been fantastic. Like, we have lots of questions. So, do you use no-till in established pastures? How many pounds of seed per acre for, okay, the seed eight per acre was answered. So, I mean, I guess it's yes, but that was pretty much a no-till planting, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, that was it no-till planter because it had a small seed box on it. It had a grain box on it. It had 3 different boxes on it, and so that's exactly what that was. Yeah.
Okay, that's
yeah. In fact, we use that for all of our planting.
Well, do the cattle graze down the row of alfalfa? Like, there was any time that the cattle really focus and select just the alfalfa?
Yes, we saw that when we interseeded into the Oriole Blue Stem that they would go down the row. And I said, "Oh no, they're going to kill my alfalfa," but they didn't. Anyway, but again, you remember, I gave them a good 8 months of establishment, and especially that first that first summer after planting, we didn't graze them hard for the June, July, August, September. We took them off, I guess it was more like the end of August or so. So I at first full summer after planting, I was still a little bit easy on them. After that, anything goes. After that, if they don't have their deep root system, then they don't belong there. And we did not let up. And yes, they did. But then and that's why it stayed an inch tall during July and August, or mid-July to mid-September or so. Then they would eat the grass because they had to eat the grass. And I figured, well, this may not come back next year. Well, it all came back. But we have a calcareous soil. We have like a pH of 7.3 to 8. And we have, and it's a clay loam. We have very high potassium, very high native potassium levels. And we don't even fertilize with potassium ever. We have so much. And of course, alfalfa loves potassium. It loves the high pH. We only once in the 8 years I've been there have I seen an insect problem. We did have some Alfalfa Weevil this spring, and that was back in March. We sprayed for it. It's gone. But I never saw Alfalfa Weevil for the previous 8 years.
Oh,
and I never seen diseases. We get no crown rots, no root rots, because it's a dry soil and it's
a dry place.
It's you don't have standing water. We never have standing water.
Yeah. No.
So that we that's a happy plant there in that soil, and I know that there are parts of Oklahoma where that's not true.
Now, there is a question here on how many cattlemen had adopted this strategy. Do you know any producer, rancher that has adopted this strategy and how that's doing?
Well, not being an extension, I don't have that kind of contact. But there are some producers that we deal with through our Texas Alliance for Water Conservation. And I've given talks like this. We've also done field walks where they actually walk the field. And I do know of some producers who do have alfalfa who do graze it, or they say, I'm going to do this, but I haven't really followed up with them as to where they've taken it. So I can't give names and numbers, but I do know that there are some that are looking at alfalfa a bit differently now, thanks to these demonstrations we've done in the field, as well as the data I presented.
All right, and the last but not the least of the questions, would this work in love grass stands as well?
Love grass, well, we haven't tried that, but the places I've seen love grass is like the harshest sites for forages and for grasses. Love grass, I know that a lot of the very original CRP land would put love grass because they just didn't have enough seed of the native grasses then. And so there are stands of the love grass around, or for conservation purposes. But again, if it would be like our native grasses in that if you got decent soil, and of course the part of decent soil is that you got some depth there. And by depth, I mean at least 2 feet, more like 3 or 4 feet better, where you don't have impeded rooting, because those deep roots are what the alfalfa takes advantage of to access deep water and to survive those summers. If you have that, then if it's love grass there, or over blue stem, or Bermuda grass, or cytoscramma, it should work.
Once they compete, they don't compete much in water because they're extracted on different layers, right?
Well, but you see, but there, I don't know as much about the love grass in terms of how deep they can go. All I know is that they can grow and persist on some really poor soils and very south-facing, west-facing slopes that are rocky and eroded and so on, which are not good places for alfalfa.
I see. Yeah. So
But-
before looking at love grass, make sure that the soil and the place is good for alfalfa, regardless of what.
Yeah, and we have tracked, you know, the soil water content like you saw by depth over there, and that was and those native grasses had fairly shallow roots because we were picking up water uptake from alfalfa below where the grasses were taking up water. So alfalfa was able to access deeper water that the natives were not able to access. And we also know that that's the same thing is occurring with the overall blue stem.
That's great. Well, I think that's all. Thank you
Okay.
very much, Dr. West. And as always, talk to you is always a learning experience for me, and I think that for everybody here was that. So everybody saying lots of thank you and everything here. So thank you very much for sharing all this information that you are doing south of us.
Well, it's always fun for me to talk about forages. I mean, most people around me don't want to hear it anymore, but you folks do want to hear it. So it's a lot of fun for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.